Montana Territory, summer of 1876, the sky was too blue for a day this cruel. Jacob Hale stood alone beside the shallow grave, his boots sunk in the soft dirt. His wide shoulders slumped like the weight of the whole world had settled there. Wind moved through the tall grass, brushing against his brown hat, tugging at the black band tied around it. He did not cry, not because he did not want to, but because there was nothing left in him to give. Delilah Kessler stood a few steps behind him, holding tight to the hand of a small boy with tear-streaked cheeks. A girl no more than 6 clung to her other side. Neither child made a sound. Their eyes were fixed on the wooden cross Jacob had hammered into the earth himself that morning. "Goodbye, Claire," Jacob said, quiet and hoarse. Delilah looked down at the children. Elias, 8, and Emmeline, 6. Claire's children, his children, now motherless, and Jacob her husband. Claire had written Delilah from their ranch near Fort Benton just 3 months earlier. Her handwriting had looked shaky. She had said the cough would pass. It did not. By the time Delilah arrived on the eastbound steamer from St. Louis, Claire was gone, and Jacob was alone with 2 children and a hollowed-out soul. Delilah had not seen Jacob in over 10 years, not since Claire married him and moved west. She had not expected to find the same strong-armed cowboy with a crooked grin and steady hands. And she had not. The man in front of her was older now, worn. His eyes were dim. He looked like he had been carved out of grief and left to weather in the sun. The burial ended with no words left to say. Jacob turned to the children, placed a hand on Elias's head, then looked at Delilah for the first time all day. "Thank you for coming," he said. His voice was flat, barely human. "Of course," Delilah said. "She was my friend." Jacob nodded, then walked back toward the small house on the hill, the children following behind like shadows. That evening, Delilah sat at the table while Jacob poured water for the children to wash up. The house was quiet except for the soft clatter of dishes and the wind creaking the shutters. "Do they eat well?" Delilah asked, watching Elias pick at his bread. "They eat," Jacob answered. Delilah looked at Emmeline, who was staring at her with wide, unblinking eyes. "Do you want more stew, sweetheart?" The girl shook her head. Delilah had no children of her own. She had never married. Her life had been work, mostly sewing, nursing, helping where she could. She had not expected to land in Montana, caring for the children of her best friend and the man she once had a quiet, foolish crush on. After supper, Jacob walked out to the porch. Delilah followed, arms crossed tight against the cold. "She was sick a long time?" she asked. He nodded. "Started with a cough. Doctor came from Fort Benton. Said it was fever. I tried everything. Boiled water, blankets, prayers." Delilah looked at him. "You did not fail her." Jacob glanced at her, then looked away. "Does not feel that way." The silence sat between them for a long while. The sun dipped low, casting gold over the fields. "I will stay a few weeks," Delilah said. "Help with the children, if that is all right." Jacob did not answer right away. He looked out at the horizon. "They need someone. And you." He hesitated. "I do not know what I need." Delilah nodded. "Then I will stay." Inside, the children had fallen asleep together on the bed Claire once shared with Jacob. Delilah tucked them in while he stood in the doorway, arms folded. "I can take the cot," she said. He shook his head. "You take the bed. I will be out in the barn." Delilah watched him go. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hand brushing Emmeline's hair. She had never imagined this, not Montana, not Jacob, not grief this heavy. But she was here now, and the children needed her. That was enough. The next days moved slow. Jacob rose before dawn, worked the cattle, mended fences, cleared brush. Delilah cooked, cleaned, helped Elias with his letters, taught Emmeline to braid her hair. Jacob spoke little, but he watched Delilah the way she soothed the children, how she kept the house warm, how she never complained when the wind howled or the water pump jammed. One morning, Emmeline ran to Delilah, crying over a scraped knee. Jacob saw Delilah kneel, whisper something soft, then kiss the girl's forehead and clean the wound. The tenderness of it lodged something sharp in his chest. That night, Delilah found him fixing the gate. "You do not have to do all this alone," she said. Jacob looked at her, sweat darkening his shirt. "It is my land, my family, my burden. But it is not just yours anymore," she said. He met her eyes. For the first time in days, something flickered there, not just pain, but hunger for something steady, something kind. "I do not know how to let anyone in," he said. Delilah stepped closer. "Then start small." Jacob swallowed. His hand brushed hers, just barely. But it was enough. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. Delilah stayed. They fell into rhythm, not lovers, not yet, but something more than strangers. Jacob began to speak more. The children laughed louder. And Delilah, she found herself looking at Jacob when he was not watching. She remembered the way Claire had once smiled at him, and now she understood why. One evening, after a long day of hauling hay, Jacob sat beside her on the porch. The stars were out, the air cool. "You make this place feel like home again," he said. Delilah looked at him. It never stopped being home. He turned to her, his eyes full. "Not until you came back." And just like that, the ache between them softened into something warm, something real. Jacob reached for her hand. She did not pull away. The wheatgrass had turned gold along the low ridge behind the house, and the days took on a softer, slower heat. By late July, the worst of the sun no longer scorched the land, though it still pressed down on the back of a man's neck when he leaned over a fence post or led a mule through rockier trails. Jacob had begun to set aside his supper shirt. Delilah noticed he folded it carefully each evening. Laying it across the end of the bed, she now shared with Emmeline when the night got too long for him to sleep in the barn. He never spoke about it, but she could tell he didn't want it to smell like sweat or hay or the smoke from the cook stove. It still held a trace of Rosewater Claire's scent, faint now, fading. One morning, with the children busy making dolls out of corn husks in the yard, Delilah brought a stack of mended shirts out to the porch where Jacob was shaping a yoke. His hands were stained with linseed oil, his jaw shadowed by 3 days' growth. "You ever think about hiring a hand?" she asked, laying the shirts beside the bench. He paused, rubbed the back of his wrist across his brow. "Tried a few last spring. None stayed. This land's too quiet for most men." "Quiet's not a bad thing," she said, lowering herself to the step beside him. "Some folks work their whole lives for a quiet place." He didn't answer. The rasp of the draw knife against wood filled the space between them. "I saw a notice tacked up in the Mercantile," she continued. "A Swedish couple looking for a place to settle. No farming, no children. Might be worth sending word." Jacob set the tool down and looked out across the field, where Elias was showing Emmeline how to balance her doll on the fence rail. "I'll think on it." Delilah nodded, then reached for the shirts. "You're wearing through the elbows again. I can patch them, but they won't take many more stitches." He glanced down at the shirt he wore. "That was Claire's doing. She always wanted me to wear the same 3. Said it made laundry easier." "She told me that," Delilah said. "Also said you didn't listen worth anything." Jacob chuckled low, surprised, and she saw the edge of something new in his face, something that hadn't been there since she arrived. Later that week, clouds rolled in from the west, and the wind turned humid in the way that meant rain would fall before dusk. Delilah took the children inside early, helping Emmeline sort through the tin box of buttons Claire had kept for mending. Jacob came in before the drizzle started. his shirt damp and clinging to his shoulders. "Storm won't last," he said, shaking off his hat. Delilah looked up from the hearth where she'd been coaxing the flame back to life. "Still don't want the girls catching cold." "They don't complain," he said, unbuckling his belt and hanging it by the door. "You do more worrying than they do." "Someone has to," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. He stood there a moment longer, watching her. Then he stepped into the kitchen, poured a dipper of water from the barrel, and drank slow and deep. "You always been this way?" he asked. "What way?" "Steady. Sure-footed." He leaned back against the wall, arms crossed. "Even when Claire got sick, you were the only one who sounded like they knew what to do." Delilah placed the kettle on the hook above the fire. "I don't know that I ever know what to do. I just do what needs doing." Jacob considered that. "Same as me, then." She stood and dusted her hands together. "No, not quite. You carry it different. You shoulder it until it breaks you." He didn't deny it. That night, the rain came harder, drumming against the tin roof. The wind rattled the windows, and Emmeline crawled into Delilah's arms without a word. In the other room, Jacob's footsteps paced once, then stopped. A moment later, the door creaked open. "You all right?" he asked, voice hushed. Delilah nodded, smoothing the child's hair. "Just the storm. I'll stay in the chair," he said, "in case they wake." He sat near the hearth, boots off, elbows resting on his knees. Delilah watched him in the firelight, his profile sharp with thought. His eyes pinned to the floor like he was listening for something that hadn't spoken in years. "You don't have to keep punishing yourself," she said softly. His gaze lifted. "I'm not." "Yes, you are." Jacob looked at the flames, then shifted his weight. "I thought I'd have more time with her," he said. "I thought she'd outlive me." "Always said she would." Delilah's arms tightened around Emmeline. "She would have wanted you to keep living, not just surviving." He didn't answer, but he didn't look away from her either. The storm passed by morning, leaving the earth rich with scent and the sky a pale, washed blue. The children rushed outside to splash in puddles and gather worms in jars. Delilah stepped onto the porch with a basket of wet laundry, and Jacob followed carrying a new line of rope. As they hung the clothes together, his hand brushed hers, and this time he didn't pull away. She didn't speak, but her fingers turned slightly, and they stood that way for a breath longer than needed. That evening, while Elias read aloud from the primer and Emmeline stitched a crooked line through a scrap of cloth, Jacob brought in a wrapped bundle from the barn. "Found this in Claire's trunk," he said, offering it to Delilah. She unfolded the cloth and found a shawl she hadn't seen since their younger days, woolen, deep green, edged in delicate lace. "She always said it suited you better," he added. "Said your shoulders carried more than hers ever did." Delilah folded it across her lap. "She said that." He nodded, and something in her shifted, like a gate unlatched, like a field broken open for planting. Jacob stood behind her chair, his hand resting on the back of it. No words passed between them then, but they didn't need to. The space between grief and grace was narrowing, and they were walking it together. August brought the flaxen hush of late summer. The cottonwoods along the creek had begun to yellow at their edges, and the air held the faintest scent of drying hay and cooling earth. Delilah rose early, before the children stirred, her bare feet brushing against the floorboards as she lit the stove and measured out cornmeal by touch. Jacob had taken to drinking his coffee near the barn, watching the sky for signs of early frost. He returned just as the biscuits browned and the lard hissed in the pan. "You ever work cattle?" he asked, setting his gloves on the table. Delilah looked up from stirring beans into the pot. "Not outside a butchery line." "Why?" "Could use another set of hands come branding. Elias isn't quite strong enough yet." She leaned her hip against the counter. I can hold a gate or fetch tools, but I've never roped anything that wasn't already hanging. Jacob gave a short nod. That's enough. Outside, Emmeline's voice carried from the yard, high and bright as she sang to her dolls. Delilah listened a moment before turning back to the stove. You planning to send them to school? She asked. They'll be of age. Only schools in town, he said. 15 miles on horse. Too far in winter. They could board with the Carvers, she said. Miriam still runs a room for children. He didn't answer right away. Then, with a note of quiet, Claire wanted that. I didn't agree, but maybe I was wrong. Delilah set the kettle on the hook. You weren't wrong. You just weren't ready. That evening, after the supper dishes were washed and the children tucked beneath quilts stitched with old names, Jacob found her in the garden behind the house. She was kneeling beside the last of the beans, fingers brushing dirt from the roots. You always this good with soil? He asked. I grew up near the Mississippi, she said, not looking up. You learn to listen to what the land tells you. Jacob crouched beside her. The dirt still carried the heft of the day's heat. And what's this land saying? That it's tired. She glanced at him. Needs rest before the cold. He nodded, brushing dust from his palms. Same could be said for folks. I don't feel tired, she said. Jacob's voice dropped low. I do, but not in the way I used to. The sky overhead deepened to a bluish gray. A single star blinked above the trees. You remember the last time we saw each other? He asked. Delilah looked at him, her hair tucked back in a soft twist. Claire's wedding. I saw you watching me, he said. Thought maybe I imagined it. You didn't, she said, voice even. Why didn't you say anything? She pulled a weed from between the row. Because she loved you. Jacob was quiet for a long moment. She did. But I think she knew. Delilah's hands stilled. Knew what? That there was a part of me that would have chosen differently if I'd met you first. Delilah stood slowly, brushing her skirt off. Her face was unreadable in the fading light. You never said that before. I didn't know how, he said. Not until now. The night settled around them, heavy with crickets and the hush of wind through dry stalks. Inside, Emmeline stirred once, and Delilah stepped away. I should check on her. Jacob didn't move. I'll be here. Morning brought the smell of sage and the sound of hooves. A rider had come up the trail, dust rising behind his gelding. Jacob met him at the gate, Delilah close behind, apron still tied. Marshall's looking for hands, the man said, tipping his hat. Rails pushing north, and they're hiring settlers to mark lines. Jacob shook his head. This land's mine. The man nodded, understanding. Offers open. Winter's coming hard this year. As the rider left, Delilah turned. You ever thought of selling? Jacob looked out across the pasture. Every day since she passed. But I never could. Because of the children? Because I didn't know where else I'd belong. Delilah stepped close then, close enough to feel the warmth of him. Maybe belonging isn't about the land. He studied her face, the curve of her jaw, the steadiness of her gaze. Maybe not, he said, but it's a good place to start. That night he didn't go to the barn. He stood by the hearth while she banked the coals, and when she turned, he reached for her hand, gentle, sure. I'm not asking for anything more than what you're ready to give, he said. Delilah looked at him, her voice steady. I've never given half of anything in my life. They stood like that for a long time, the fire slowly dimming behind them. And when he kissed her, it was quiet, like everything else between them earned, unhurried and true. The first frost came early, creeping in under the eaves and curling the leaves of the squash vine before Delilah could harvest the last of them. She pulled her shawl tighter as she stepped out to the yard, her breath visible in the morning air. A thin mist hung over the pasture, the kind that made the world feel softer, like it hadn't quite woken. Jacob was already at the pump, sleeves rolled, working the handle with one hand, the other wrapped around a tin cup. The water steamed as it hit the trough. "I found a set of traps rusting near the fence line," he said as she approached. "Foxes been nosing at the henhouse. I'll mend the fence after breakfast," she offered. He shook his head. "I'll see to it. You've got the last of the apples to dry, don't you?" She glanced toward the baskets near the porch, fruit already mottled from the cold. "I'll need to peel them before they turn." He handed her the cup. "Warm your hands first." The tin was still damp from his touch. She held it close, not for the heat, but because it felt like something shared, simple and quiet, but thoughtful in a way she hadn't known from a man before. Inside, Elias sat hunched over the table, a pencil gripped tight in his hand, tongue caught between his teeth. Emmeline, still barefoot and wrapped in the quilt, sorted seed pods into neat piles. Delilah ruffled Elias's hair as she passed. "You're nearly through your letters. Next week, I'll show you the hornbook." He didn't look up. "Will Papa let me go to school?" "You'll ask him yourself when you're ready." Outside, Jacob set to the traps. Delilah watched from the window, the knife slipping easily through the apple skins. He moved with quiet purpose, not hurried but never idle, as if the rhythm of the land shaped every part of him. Later that day, she found him inside the shed, sorting through a crate of old tack. Dust clung to the air in slanted beams of light. "Do you keep everything?" she asked, setting down a folded burlap sack. "Some things still got use," he said, holding up a cracked leather strap. "Others, I reckon I keep out of habit." She brushed her fingers along a wooden yoke. "Claire's father built this, didn't he?" Jacob nodded. "He gave it to us when we took the land. Said it was strong enough to last 2 lifetimes. Is that the measure of strength then? How long something holds under weight?" He looked at her, eyes quiet. "Maybe. Or how well it carries what's given." She stepped closer, her voice low. "You stopped wearing your mourning band." His jaw shifted. "Didn't notice." "I did," she said. He set the strap aside. "I still think of her, but it doesn't ache the same." She didn't speak, only reached for his hand. He let her take it. That night, after the children were asleep, Delilah sat darning Emmeline's stocking by lamplight. Jacob joined her, drawing the rocker closer, his boots scuffed from the day. "I sent a letter today," he said. She looked up. "To who?" "Miriam Carver. Asked if she still boards schoolchildren." Delilah's fingers stilled. "You're sending them?" "If she'll have them. Only for the winter term. I figure they ought to know more than what I can teach." She watched his face. "You're braver than you think." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I want more for them. And for you. For us." There was no hesitation in his voice, no faltering. She set the stocking aside. "Then ask me." "Ask you what?" "To stay. Not just through the frost. Not as a helping hand or a guest. Ask me like a man who's found his heart again." He stood, slow and sure, and knelt beside her chair. "Delilah Kessler," he said, voice thick. "Will you stay here with me, with them as my wife?" She reached for him, her hands cradling his face. "I already have," she whispered. He kissed her there, beneath the lamplight, her thimble falling to the floor, forgotten. His hands were still rough, hers still bearing the scent of dried apples and hearth smoke, but between them was something steadier than all they had weathered. In the morning, Elias would find the stocking finished and ask no questions. Emmeline would braid ribbons into her Sunday dress. The house would carry on, as it always had, but now with something new woven into its walls. Not a replacement, a beginning. By mid-September, the first geese passed overhead in ragged V-shaped lines, calling out across the high Montana sky. The days shortened, shadows stretching longer beneath the cottonwoods, and the mornings brought a crispness that settled into the bones. Jacob had begun rising before the sun again, not out of habit, but to check the low places in the pasture where frost gathered thickest. Delilah found the rhythm of the days suited her. Not easy, but honest. She no longer had to guess where she belonged. She knew it in the way Jacob reached for her hand as they passed in the hallway, in how Elias listened more closely when she spoke, and how Emmeline leaned against her side during the long evenings by the fire. One afternoon, Jacob came in from the shed with a wooden box tucked under his arm. She was finishing the last row of stitches on a new Sunday blouse for Emmeline and looked up when she heard the hinges creak. "I was thinking on what you said," he began, placing the box gently on the table. "About starting new, not just holding on to what's old." She set her needle down, curious. He opened the box. Inside lay a simple silver ring, worn smooth at the edges but clean, polished. A single braid of Delilah's hair, saved from the first night he'd brushed it for her, rested beside it, tied with a strip of blue calico. "I bought this for Claire when we married," he said. "She wanted something plain. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to look at it. But now I think maybe it's time it meant something new." Delilah touched the edge of the ring. "You sure?" He looked at her, steady as ever. "I am." She nodded once, then picked up the ring and slid it onto her finger. It fit, not perfectly, but close enough that it felt right. That Sunday, they rode into Fort Benton with the children. It was the first time they'd all gone into town together since the burial. Jacob wore his cleanest shirt. Delilah pinned up her hair with the ivory comb Claire had once given her. Emmeline clutched her doll, and Elias sat taller in the saddle than he ever had before. Pastor Whitlow stood waiting outside the chapel, hat in hand and boots dusty from the trail. Jacob stepped forward. "We'd like to say our vows." The pastor looked between them, then nodded. "You've got the hands for it. Hard-working folks make the strongest promises." Inside, the ceremony was small. Just them and the children, the scent of beeswax and old hymnals filling the quiet space. Jacob took her hand and spoke his words simply, without flourish. "I'll build with you, Delilah," he said. "Not just this house, but a life." She met his gaze without flinching. "And I'll carry it with you, not behind, not ahead, beside." Elias stood between them, holding the ring. He passed it to Jacob with both hands, not speaking, but his eyes said enough. Emmeline clapped when the ring slid into place. No one cried. There was no need. The moment held its own fullness. They rode home slowly, the prairie wind soft against their backs. The sun dipped low, casting everything in amber. Delilah leaned into Jacob's side as they crested the final rise. "I never thought I'd wear another woman's ring," she said. He glanced at her. "She'd have wanted it. You know that." "I do." The barn was warm when they led the horses in. Jacob unbuckled the saddles while she took the children inside. Later, when the house had gone still, he found her seated at the table, lamplight catching the gold in her hair. He pulled out the chair beside her. "I've been thinking about spring." She raised an eyebrow. "That's so? If Elias and Emmeline take to school, we might think on building another room. Give them space when they come home." She smiled, slow and sure. "And maybe a cradle, too?" He looked at her then. Really looked. "You think we'll need one?" "I hope so," she said. "Not now, but someday." He reached across the table, his hand closing over hers. "I want that more than I ever thought I could again." That night, they lay together beneath the same quilt Delilah had stitched through the summer. He traced the curve of her shoulder, her breath soft against his chest. "You know," she murmured, "I used to think I'd end up alone." "I did too," he said. She turned toward him, her palm resting over his heart. "But we didn't." "No," he whispered, kissing her brow. "We didn't." Years passed. The land remained theirs. In time, a new room was added to the house, first for the children's books and schoolwork, then for the babe born the following spring, a boy with Jacob's quiet eyes and Delilah's steady hands. They named him Samuel, after Delilah's grandfather, who'd once told her that some things, like love, grew best in wide-open places. Elias grew tall and took to blacksmithing, his arms strong from years of mending harness and shaping iron. Emmeline loved stories, and by the age of 12, she could read aloud with a voice clear enough to quiet a room. And Jacob and Delilah? They grew older, not apart, but closer with each passing season. Their love never burned hot, it burned long, like firewood stacked right and tended well. On their porch, come autumn, they sat side by side watching the wind move through the grass. No words needed, just the warmth of joined hands, a life built slowly, and a peace they'd earned, together.